This is a story about hummingbirds that leave Mexico in early March and hum into America to raise a family. The star of our story is a female black-chinned hummingbird. Apparently she uses the Rio Grande River to guide her to her Texas nesting grounds. Mexico is on her left, Texas on her right. Along the river, she refuels on nectar from flowers growing on the river's banks. Her wings beat 47 times each second. She also snaps up mosquitoes and gnats from air above the water. To a hummingbird, insects are nutritionally the same as hamburger, chicken, and fish are to us. Insects are her source for protein, and she couldn't live without them. She eats 10 to 15 of the little bugs each day and washes them down with more nectar. At a bend in the river, she turns north and flies across Del Rio, Texas. Her destination is a large RV storage barn 3 miles north of town. Hummingbirds have probably nested in this barn since it was built in the 40s as a lumber company. However, they weren't discovered in the barn until 1998. That year, 3 little hens were nesting under the protection of the barn's roof. It was difficult for the little hens to find a place to nest in the barn. Here, one built on a wire next to the barn's hot tin roof. Del Rio's hot sun turned her home into an oven. She cooled her baby by fanning it with her hovering wings. On the ground below the overheated nest, we found this baby. Hoping to save its life, we placed it in the nest of a hen that already had 2 chicks of her own. The nest was in a cooler part of the barn. After we were sure the mother had accepted the 3rd chick, we drove 450 miles back to our home in Clovis, New Mexico. A week later, we returned to Del Rio. One of the 3 chicks was hanging by a toenail to a strand of spider webbing on the outside of the nest. It was so weak, we didn't think it had a chance. We put the baby in an empty nest of its own and placed it next to the nest it had been pushed from. Almost immediately, the mother flew in and fed the little rascal. The little chick was so weak, we were surprised it had strength enough to raise its little head. After she fed the almost starved chick, she reached across to feed the other chicks, and notice how much larger those other chicks are. One of the bigger chicks that may have pushed the infant out looked into the new nest, as if to see what was going on next door. All 3 chicks grew big enough to fly on their own from their separate nest. Determined to nest out of the weather, the hen that built this nest was forced to attach to a rope dangling from the rafters. This hen was forced to build on baling wire. It was also in a hot location. The chick died and is mummified inside the nest. Here, a chain was used as a foundation. In nature, hummingbirds almost always build nests on the fork of a small branch about the size of a pencil. To give the little hummers better choices for raising a family in the barn's protection, we formed steel rod into a duplication of a fork in a branch. We installed several of the artificial nesting platforms in cool parts of the barn. A green leaf was added to make the little moms feel at home. Liking the platform, the little hens built nests and started families there. Each year, the number of hummingbirds nesting in the barn increases. In 2003, 16 happy hummingbird hens nested in our platforms. In 2004, we expect even more. When the mother-to-be hummers hum into the barn to nest, they go house shopping, inspecting first one platform and then another, and another, until she finds a location to her liking. The force driving her choice is finding a place with the least wind, even in the barn's already good protection. We're sure she shops in nature, too, humming from tree to tree and branch to branch until she finds just the right location. She comes in and takes a quick look to make sure it's going to be okay. And then after making her selection, she makes a quick touch-and-go landing, presumably to check for dangers that may be lurking. At this point, she also makes quick flights in and out of the platform from different directions, as if checking to make certain there are no obstructions, and also to make sure she can approach her nest under differing wind conditions. Since this will be her home for the next 42 days and the future home of her children, it makes sense for her to be picky. Female eagles do these same maneuvers when those huge birds are selecting a nest site. After a touch and go, she lands and visits briefly as if doubly checking to make certain there are no predator surprises. If the site passes that test, she lands, looks over the neighborhood, and decides it's okay, and brings in the first load of building material, spider webbing. Notice after she leaves that there is a bit of spider webbing she just applied is trailing from the platform. More spider webbing follows, this time with a bit of dried grass. After consulting with spider experts, we made these frames. Our hope was to attract spiders to spin webbing on the inside rectangle. Our aim was to offer the webbing to the little nest-building hens. Our goal was to photograph the moms-to-be gathering her spider webbing. Obviously, spider webbing is a major component of her nest. Although the frames haven't worked for us yet, they have taught us that the little hummingbirds usually only fresh webbing spun the night before, webbing new enough to have not yet ensnared bugs. The hens reject older, day-old webbing, apparently because new, freshly spun webbing has more stickiness. Since she weighs no more than a penny, to compact the floor of her nest, she clamps her right foot onto the platform's limb and stomps her nest floor with the other. The day she arrived at the barn, here is what she looked like. Notice her feet. Soon after arriving, here is what she looks like. Note you can no longer see her feet because her little body is swollen with developing eggs. My wife couldn't see her feet either when she was pregnant. The weight of those developing eggs is an extra burden for her to lift throughout her nest building. She makes an average of 34 trips to the nest per hour. After spider webbing, she flies in camouflage material, and then soft plant down as insulating material. Besides the weight of developing eggs, there's another element in nest building that increases her workload even more. Her first day of building is frantic because she starts 2 nests at once. We think the birds start 2 nests the first day as insurance to increase her odds of successfully raising a family. If one site turns out to be too windy or too whatever, she discontinues building at that site and concentrates on the best of her 2 choices. Notice how her camouflaging matches the rust pattern of the barn's structural pipe. The little hens go to extreme lengths to make their nest nearly invisible. She works on her nest 4 hours straight each day. The 4-hour period varies with individual birds. However, none begins before the 2nd hour after sunrise. Notice her foot stomping again, stomping the inside of her nest. So where is the daddy bird during the female's flurry of nest building activity? We have never seen a male bird near the nesting site. Since she goes to great lengths to hide her nest, she has either ordered the daddy bird, with his bright neon sign feathers, to stay out of sight, or he has sense enough on his own to keep his bright colors away from her work. Either way, she builds the nest alone and raises their chicks alone. On average, nest building takes 5 days. Sometimes, the minute she leaves to gather more nest building material, a neighbor hurries up, grabs material for use in building her nest, and quickly carries it off. When the nest is about half finished, during the second hour after sunrise, the little hen lays her first egg. After an egg arrives, she's careful not to blast them out of the nest by aiming her wing downwash sideways when she leaves or lands. Twice we have seen eggs blasted from the nest by wing downwash. Continuing to build on her nest, she skips a day before laying her second egg. Labor lasts about 4 minutes. Her second egg also arrives during the second hour after sunrise. Obviously, she is glad the egg-laying ordeal is over. If humans gave birth to babies proportional to the size of hummingbird eggs, our babies would weigh 25 pounds. 2 eggs is all she lays. Both would fit on a penny. She begins incubation after the second egg arrives. She has a unique way of controlling the temperature of her eggs. She builds the wall of the nest that is toward the prevailing wind denser, thicker, if you will. The side of the nest away from the wind is less dense. Those features allow her to regulate the flow of cooler or warmer air through her nest by using her body to close off or open the less dense side. Her body temperature is 104 degrees. She attempts to hold an egg incubation temperature of 98. A heat wave of successive days with temperatures in the hundreds will kill the embryo inside her eggs. After both eggs have arrived, if the nest isn't finished to her satisfaction, she continues working on her nest. After 14 days, the little chick hatches. Feeding her first baby begins immediately. She feeds new chicks mostly insects, which loads their little bodies with growth-giving protein. She feeds them about every 20 minutes. And when she leaves to gather more food, she covers her new chick with a blanket of soft down. Upon returning, she removes the blanket. Apparently, she just came from a sugar water feeder and has a sticky beak. A very sticky beak. A very, very sticky beak. She finally dislodges it with rubbing it against more sticky spider webbing. You can see the importance of providing your hummers a place to bathe. The next time she leaves, that's where she goes. Shortly after the first chick arrives, the second struggles into the world. Pausing fairly often to rest between struggles. It's difficult to imagine that this tiny creature, weighing less at birth than one pinto bean, will in a few short weeks be humming hundreds of miles from Texas into Mexico. She broods them every night for the first 9 nights. At that point, they have developed enough feathers to keep themselves warm, and she perches away from them at night for the remainder of their time in the nest. It's easy to see why she lays no more than 2 eggs. Spiderwebbing gives the nest flexibility to stretch as the chicks grow. Between mom's feedings, if a small insect flies close enough, the youngsters will zap that bite of protein right out of the air. This chick is about to let her fly. Watch out below. The chicks are full grown in 21 to 23 days. The length of time is apparently tied to how well fed they are. Before leaving the nest, the chicks preen their feathers into shape for flying. Notice that they scratch like a dog. Exercising their wings pumps breast muscles up for that first flight. The chicks seem to know instinctively that for that flight, their feathers must be arranged perfectly and flight muscles perfectly tuned. Watch this little bird as it makes a decision about which way to go for that first flight. To the antenna on that blue recreational vehicle below, or maybe the antenna on that white one over there. Or maybe that antenna. Or that wire over there. Or maybe that branch ahead. At times, the chick becomes tired and rests and takes time to think about the biggest decision of its life so far. The moment of that first flight, that leap into the big wide world.